So when I did Mississippi Fortress, I didn't see that I had Lee takes command. I knew I had it because I knew that I had the Grant takes command as well. But I was looking around and maybe I did see it, but I didn't see my Autumn of Glory that I don't have. I think. It's hard to tell. I had that mold issue a while back, and I just have not rearranged everything, and my whole room, my whole house needs to be reordered. But anyway, this is one I picked up, and I forgot what that title absolutely had to mean. I got a little confused with the Grand Takes Command, but yeah, obviously Lee took over the Army of Northern Virginia during McClellan's Peninsular Campaign. And this is not the whole Peninsular Campaign. This takes me back to, I hope I'm not totally fucking my life up in terms of understanding. I haven't read this in a while, but I think this is the, yeah. One of the problems is my history, it gets blurred a little bit. It always has. This isn't an age thing. It's just sometimes I can't remember all the kings of England and stuff like that. And it's the same kind of thing. Yeah. I've gotten into discussions from like, wait a minute, he did that? But anyway, the neat thing about this is that it's actually one of the very first games that I videoed. Was it the very first? Was when I did the 7 days battles for the CWB series. And this is that. In fact, it's 7 days, I believe. June 25th to July 2nd. Right? 5, yeah. Okay. Maybe 8 days, I don't know. Off by one error. But anyway, this is the 7 days battles. And this is a much, much broader view. I think that kind of took me, let's see. Trying to see. That took me, I think, this river line was the one end. And I think the map basically covered something like this. And of course it was 9 maps, the first monster. And yeah, I've done something. So that was the first time I had ever played a game that was more than 3 full-size maps. So that was, kind of challenging. It ate up my whole living room. And it was 9, which very hard to reach in the middle of the table. Any bigger than that I couldn't have handled. But anyway, it's kind of neat to come back to this after so long. Now this isn't completely set up. In particular, I don't have any of the dummies down, which kind of don't matter since the players know the setup under the basic game. I do have the pieces in the right location. This is not... So none of these games are just the standard rules. They all have some special rules. In particular, chain of command, for example, has to be expressed in the game. So let's take a quick look and see what we have here. We have Lee with Magruder, Jackson, and Longstreet in the base game. By the way, all of these, so far both of these games that I've had, have a bunch of counters that are optional, they're starred, that are a scenario that's not available in the game. The last one that I played, apparently the 2nd edition rules had the expansion rules in them, I think. Here I've got the 2nd edition standard rules. I don't know if I have some 2nd edition of this, but I get the feeling that those rules were published separately in a magazine somewhere or another. It's down in my bedroom. I have Grant Takes Command, which uses the same map handling the Wilderness Campaign by Grant, basically the Lee versus Grant scenario, which I think I'll come back to and do as well, but I haven't clipped those counters. You'll see these guys, I just side clipped them because they were side mounted, so they have sharp edges. I hope I don't cut myself. I don't know what I'm trying to do here. I'm just babbling because I've been having a hard time getting started. Gotten myself distracted by things. So anyway, the commands here for the Confederates, you have Magruder's command, which works normal. You have Jackson's command. On turn 4 of Jackson's command, you can transfer D.H. Hill and Whiting from Magruder over to Jackson, which can be very useful, I think. And there'll be replacement units over here to handle them. It might cause some issues with the loss charts. And let's see what else. Turn 9, the Confederates have the option to create a new command under Longstreet. And this would give him, let's see, A.P. Hill and Longstreet's division and Branch's brigade. They'd all be under Longstreet. And these are probably good ideas because having more commanders on the field is a good thing. The other set of rules, I don't know what it's for, but it takes... So this is kind of like a proto-corps type setup. The other one separates the army into wings, and I think there are only 2 commands, basically. But I'm not sure. I don't have the rules. All I have is some counters. Okay, the home areas for this. Richmond is going to be the Confederate home area with the normal rules there. If you can cut the line of communications between Lee and Richmond, the Union player gets a victory point each turn. And it'll also inform withdrawals and retreats. And the Union home area is initially down here in the White House. But if you recall anything about the campaign, McClellan gets scared. And this game, the designer is very much convinced that McClellan did the right thing. Most historians seem to think that, you know, McClellan gets spooked by the size of the armies and does something stupid. But in a sense, this one makes a persuasive argument that what McClellan did was actually very clever and saved his army. That the main thing is that being divided by the river was a horrible thing. So anyway, he's allowed to shift his army back down to the peninsula and away from Richmond, which he historically did. And there's rules for that and reasons he wants to do it. In addition to the withdrawals and retreats, the Union has to have McClellan trace line of command communications to his home area, or else the Confederates get 2 victory points each turn. A bunch of dummy units, again limited by the number. Actually, this is, I think, less than in the last game. You can use a number of dummy infantry only equal to half the number of actual units you have in the game. So, however, the Confederates have all theirs on the board to begin with. The Union has a couple of extra. They don't get any reinforcements in this scenario, and some of the dummies are starred, but we'll see. Maybe they're not allowed as many as they can have at the beginning of the game as they can have later. There's weather in this game, and again, there should be a weather table. Yeah, there's an optional weather table, and you just have clearer rain. They do have modifiers. One of my problems with Mississippi Fortress was some of the weather seemed a little unreasonable. This one gets you some time basis that gets you closer to the historical. And given that it's only 8 days or whatever, I would be happy with completely random weather in that period of time. The other one was more than a month. Rain. This is similar. Your intensity level is lowered during rain. Stragglers are increased, and the major rivers all flood. This is new, and are impassable to all combat units, even over bridges, ferries, and fords. The Union supply trains cannot cross, And there's a marker for whether the rivers are passable or not. So we have this thing, which I'll put over here with my game turn track stuff. Okay. Naval Operations, another game with boats. Yeah, the Peninsular Campaign, sure. There's some Union gunboats. The problem they are going to face is 2 gun positions from the Confederates and then a big blockage south of Richmond. They can move anywhere along the James River and up to the White House on the Pamunkey, this thing. And they can't keep going further on there. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Pamunkey. But if they're moving between the 2 rivers, there's a transit box that travels down here. And they can move 1 holding box per turn. So it's very hard to shift the boats up to here where they're barely usable. They can stack up to 6 high on any river arrow. That's how many there are. And they cannot transport any units. However, they have defensive strength of 1, which can support any defending units in any area adjacent to the James. You add the strength of the gunboats to the strength of the units being attacked. They don't take any losses. Once they're on the battle board, they can't be moved around on that. And their strength is never modified by terrain. The guns emplacements at Drury's Bluff and Chaffin's Bluff. The shore batteries, the Union can't sail past them. They have to stop and engage them in combat. Both shore batteries are face up, and they're visible at all times. They may not move. They exert limited control over the area they occupy. If Union Land Army units enter into a battery, one of these shore batteries, and there's no Confederate units to protect it, it is destroyed. The gunboats, when they come in, they have to engage, and they can't go further until both shore batteries are destroyed. This happens during the combat between them happens during the Union movement. Both shore batteries will fire at the adjacent gunboats. First the shore batteries fire, then the gunboats. To attack with both batteries, the Confederate rolls 1 die and consults the shore battery CRT, which I haven't even looked at. How fitting. To see how many ships are sunk by the 2 batteries. If only 1 battery is firing, you get a -1 to the die roll, which seems pretty minor if half the firepower is gone, but okay. The Union player can then fire with his gunboats by rolling a die on the gunboat CRT over here, and if it gets a D, it silences the battery. If at least 1 Confederate shore battery still exists after any round of combat, the Union player must withdraw his remaining gunboats downstream. Yeah, so this battery silenced, it's permanent. Okay. The river obstacle at the start of the scenario is the river obstacle counter. And on any Union player turn following a turn in which the last shore battery is destroyed, the remaining gunboats may move as far as the arrow with the river obstacle marker. Then he rolls a die for each boat and consults the river obstacle table, and that's for each ship to see if the ship sinks. Then what? On the turn following the river obstacle die roll, the Union player can move his remaining gunboats upriver to any other river arrow. Note that the Union must stop and roll on the river obstacle table each time he enters that marker. He can't clear it. And he gets 1 victory point per turn for each gunboat that is on the river arrow adjacent to 77 during the victory phase. That's here. And those are going to be bombarding Richmond and causing enough problems that the rebels are going to get hurt by it somehow. You know, I mean, a morale thing, really. Okay, special terrain. Now, for this one, again, we have a terrain chart. This one's a little bit maybe more readable, I'm not sure. It's so hard because it's not in color and this is in this weird color. And so they don't give examples of how to find it. So, I mean, I look at clear. Okay, this is clear. This is defensible with a little woods. What's rough? That's a good question. Rough looks like kind of a crater on here. Is that brown? Well, obviously no, nothing's brown. And it's not this stuff. That's going to be swamp. So let's, maybe this? I don't know. That doesn't really look like this. This is the problem with these maps. I mean, if there was a map key on the map, it could take up some pointless space, like way up here, and tell me, or it could be on the back of here, but where they, or something where they have printing in color. I don't, double siding it is something more problematic, so I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know. Let's keep looking. Maybe rough isn't in this game and it's printed on here, we'll see. So, because I don't see it, and I also don't see it in the rules. Okay, so the special terrain, yeah, I'm just going to assume that the rough terrain does not exist because I don't see anything that looks like this. But again, I can't be sure. Oh. This looks more like maybe swamp. This looks like swamp with, oh, I see, this is swamp, this is clear. Yeah. I don't know. Whatever. Okay, for swamps, there are 3 different types of swamp. There are swamp areas. Areas 91 and 92 are an example of this. Okay, great. So the only way we find out is by finding them on the map, which is what I wanted, but okay, that's a swamp area. And that's marked here. We see river and gully swamps, yeah. We'll get to those. Okay, artillery and supply train units may only enter or exit this via roads and bridges, not via fords or ferries. All other units can enter or transit it in any direction, but they can't go across a major river without a crossing point. Well, the major rivers can't be crossed. Combat's possible, but artillery cannot be in a line position. They have to be in reserve for both sides. Infantry and cav are individually halved in combat strength points, rounding up, and you can say, well, what does that matter? Yeah, it doesn't matter for the CIC, but it matters for the firepower. Assault, well, actually, if they're individually halved rounding up, that might change the strength of units too, which is kind of annoying. But assault and counterattack cannot be issued. The defender's final strength point total is shifted 1 column to the left on the fire combat after all other column shifts have occurred. And if we look at the fire combat, that's bad. The attacker is shifted 2 columns to the left, even worse. The presence of a superior rated officer will still adjust the fire combat in their favor. And defending units issued a withdrawal order that withdraw into a swamp must roll on the straggler loss table, and they add 1 to the die roll, and then double the number of stragglers lost up to 50% of their total strength points. Right. Okay. River swamps. They're not terrain themselves, but run in areas separated by major rivers along the river, i.e. between Cedar Grove and Stream Mill along the Chickahominy. Okay, well, first we have to assume this is the Chickahominy, which I think, but I'm not positive. And Rivers Mill and something else. This is a great way to reference stuff in the game, isn't it? Cedar Grove and Stream Mill, not Rivers Mill. Okay, so here's Stream Mill, here's Cedar Grove, and we're seeing something there. And I would say that looks like it's kind of everywhere. I don't know. I mean, again, these maps are barely usable. They're very pretty and everything. Okay, so there's not one here. It looks like this river is just all that. Great. Why didn't they say the whole damn thing? Because they want me to look up everything. Well, maybe some of them are gully swamps. Okay. These swampy borders are called river swamps. If the attacker crossed the river swamp this turn, then during combat, the attacker has his combat strength halved as if it's a normal river combat. In addition, the attacker suffers an odds column shift to the left on the CICB chart. No. Is there an A and B? No. Why is it called CIC? Oh. A determines which CIC you're on. B determines the actual losses. Gotcha. And his artillery units may not occupy a line position. Basically, the attacker is in the swamp crossing the river. During combat rounds on subsequent turns, the attacking units are again halved in strength. However, for the original units that attacked in a previous turn, there's no CICB penalty column shift, and artillery can be used in the line. And there is a marker for this swamp crossing, which would go on units that crossed a swamp river, I guess. The presence of a superior rated leader. Defending units issued a withdrawal order that withdraw across river swamps suffer the same penalty as if they went through a swamp. Gully swamps. These follow along minor creek borders between areas, e.g. between Eller's Mill and Gaines Mill. Well, luckily for me, I have some idea where Gaines Mill may be. Here it is. And is this Eller's Mill? No. This is Eller's Mill. So, yeah, right, I can see that. I mean, I can. Am I going to remember it in play? Probably not. Great. If the attacker crossed the gully swamp, during the combat round, the attacker suffers an odds column penalty on the CIC, and his artillery cannot occupy a line position. Now, this is weird because actually in the swamp, your CIC is not affected directly. It's your fire column results that are affected. And I don't understand these decisions. During the combat rounds on subsequent turns, the attacker suffers no further penalty on the CIC and his artillery can occupy the line positions. The attacker does not require a superior rated officer to remain here because it's not a major river. It's just a... Defending units issued the withdrawal unit order going across gully swamps, add one to their straggler die, double the loss, blah, blah, blah. The Richmond Fortified Zone. This is 77, 89, and 98 or something like that. 77, 89, 98, going down the hill there, where the ridge work. Confederate units defending in these areas get some benefits. Confederate units defending in the area have their current strength point total tripled for odds comparisons. God, my throat. I gotta stop for a bit. On the CIC and when using the fire combat results table, they also suffer one less strength point loss per round of combat on both tables. Okay. Confederate units adjacent to the fortified zone must withdraw into it if they were issued a withdrawal order during a combat round. Union units attacking the fortified zone areas must destroy, render ineffective, or drive off all Confederates, or they have to retreat back to where they came from, as if they did a withdrawal, without stragglers. Some of the bridges in the map have special rules. A couple are weak. The bridge separating 69 and 81 may only be crossed by leaders and infantry. Okay. So, unfortunately, the numbers are semi-ordered. That'll be, here's 81. 69 is nowhere near it, which is interesting. Nice. Is this 69? Yeah, I'm guessing this is 69. That's unreadable there, but maybe better on the camera, but this is 70. So it's this bridge is hard to cross. It's not marked in any way. Just have to remember these things. You can't put Cav artillery supply trains on it. And all printed bridges on the Chickahominy from Long Bridge southward are destroyed at the start of all scenarios. Wow. Interesting that there were no rules to place the destroyed bridges there. I got counters for them. Okay. So we have to find the Long Bridge southwards. Okay, so we start looking. Here's something that might say long. No, it says lower. I'm just looking for anything that might say Long Bridge. These are really hard to read. Okay, well. Oh, here's Long Bridge. Okay. Oops, that's a pontoon bridge. Wrong counters. This is a Long Bridge. And there aren't that many, so that's useful. Okay, so I have some bridge destroyed markers. And I have some pontoon bridges. Great. Okay. The pontoon bridges are an optional rule, and I decided, of course, to make this more complicated by adding some of the optional rules. We'll hit them in a bit. Okay. Union command restrictions. McClellan. These have to be important because if McClellan could operate, fully, and for that matter, Lee, this battle would have been a lot different. McClellan abandoned his responsibilities as overall commander to supervise his change of base. Okay, the Union player may move and fight with only a part of his army each turn. You roll a die at the start of his communication phase to determine how many corps are activated each turn. And here is the die roll. And is it on my charts and tables? I would hope so, but you never know. There we go. Good. Now you know. Okay. The supply trains, if they're moving in a change of base, will count between them as a corps. If McClellan wants to move them. And there is one change, an optional rule that added something. I forgot this. Called the general retreat, and that comes into play here. Basically, the general retreat, because this game freezes units in place when they're fighting, the general retreat is a way to get your units out of that situation. And I really like this because we didn't see such a situation really, but it could have happened. I think it was 6 something. There we go. During communications, you declare a general retreat, and all of your forces are affected by it. All the units must move one area closer to their own home area. Normally, infantry cannot leave an enemy-controlled area unless they fought. However, if you're doing a general retreat, you may exit an enemy-controlled area even if you haven't gotten a combat eligibility. Infantry doing a general retreat have their line of command to their officer and their officer to the LOC in order to do it. And any unit's movement has to be along the shortest route towards the side's home. Due to these conditions, you may have some units that cannot be impacted by the general retreat. They're left behind, they're lost, they're too far out of command. Okay, so that's an optional rule that will go for any in the series, and I don't know, I wish I had had it in the last one. It would have perhaps changed some of my decisions with the Confederates because they could have fallen back to Richmond in a way that they weren't able to in the game. Not Richmond, Vicksburg. Yeah, so what do we got here? So The basic Union formation is the corps. If the Union player opts to activate a corps or the supply trains, McClellan has to start the turn adjacent to or in the same area as the officer whose corps or the supply trains themselves the Union player wishes to move, and the infantry units making up the corps must be in or adjacent to the area containing their respective corps officer. However, if McClellan is not adjacent to or in the same area as the officer, he may still activate units by counting them as 2 of his command points that he has for the turn. McClellan must also be in or adjacent to the area in which the Union player wishes to conduct any attacks. If he wishes to attack in more than one area, this is possible if McClellan is adjacent to the same area as the officer whose corps the Union player wishes to attack, and the infantry units must also be in or adjacent to their respective corps officer. Only activated corps are allowed to attack, and they may only use 2 line positions when attacking. When attacking in conjunction with Union infantry units, the cav and artillery are subject to this rule as well. You can't make them the third wing. Okay. However many Union corps are in the area where the attack takes place, the Union may never have units from unactivated corps in line positions when attacking, and may never occupy more than 2 line positions with his units when attacking or defending. I gotta stop again. Okay. This restriction applies regardless how many corps are actually activated in the presence or the presence or absence of McClellan, and then there's some exceptions. Union cav and artillery are not affected by these specific combat restrictions and can be freely deployed to either of the 2 line positions if involved in combat. Shifting bases. Remember, a lot of this battle is predicated on McClellan shifting his base. When playing the campaign scenario, if the Confederate player makes at least 1 attack in an area north of the Chickahominy during the first 4 turns of the game, the Union is then allowed to perform a base change. He doesn't have to. He gets 10 victory points if he does so, however. The Confederate may not trigger this, and if it's not triggered by turn 5, it will not occur. If the Union opts to shift his base, he must place the Union new supply base marker. Okay, so we have the new home area somewhere down here. I don't know why the supply trains are there. They set up initially. Yeah, so you place this in the port that you want to be on. And these will be north of the James River. There's a series of ports that you can switch to. You pick which one you want to move to. And then you have 3 dummies. And basically what's going to happen is the Confederates do not know where your new base is. It can be, one of the spaces will be real, 3 of them can be dummies. You could also fake this whole thing. I don't see how this works. You can fake it by placing the real marker in the White House area. Okay, so it doesn't look like this, so it could be kind of like a dummy unit in that case. But then you'd only have 3 available. And the 3 dummy markers in new areas. On the turn that you decide to shift your base, the new area chosen automatically becomes the new Union home area, and the line of communication between McClellan and his home area is traced from that area from the rest of the game. After shifting the base, the Union player has his first supply train here. Leave White House the next turn. The remaining supply train can follow in the following turn. They count as a corps between them that needs to be activated. The new base must be revealed at the end of the game if it hasn't already been somehow. And the base marker in the area must be revealed at the end of a Confederate player turn if the Confederate player occupies the area with a real unit. Confederate Special Command Restrictions. During 7 days, the Confederate commanders, including Stonewall Jackson, displayed an erratic sense of timing and duty. First of all, each turn after the line positions and combat orders are assigned in a combat round. But before any units are revealed, the Confederate player has to roll a die to determine which parts of the battlefield are allowed to actually conduct an attack. Roll a die and read the results on the chart below. Move all units in the affected wings from the line position they occupy to the reserve position. The attack must still go on, however. This will not be used if the Confederates are defending. You subtract 1 from the die roll if infantry units from 2 or more different formations are present in the area, not just the line position. And remember, normally you want 1 formation in 1 position, although numerically Confederate units are large enough that maybe you don't. And you add 1 if this is the second or more turn of Confederate declared attacks. Some special rules: the supply trains, they represent 2,500 wagons. They themselves may only move if McClellan changes base. They must count as a corps. If activated, they normally move 1 area per turn and must move by road or over bridges and fords, and not ferries. Once they've moved on a road into an area, no further road movement into that area is possible by any other units via that road. Therefore, you can't force march through an area on a train used by a train. The 2 trains cannot exit from 1 area to an adjacent area using the same road in the same turn. Supply trains cannot force march. However, once per game, the Union player can move his onboard supply trains to areas following a road. He may make this decision only once per game. Both trains cannot end their movement in the same area. Now, I believe there's a problem that can happen with this because, remember, you're not allowed to move along the road that they used. So if you have them chained, you actually have an issue. Yeah. Train may move into the first area, but not into the second area entered by the first train unless there was a different road going into that area. And some of the areas actually have multiple roads connecting them, so yeah. Like other units, supply trains are face down at all times and may be stacked with any sort of Union unit using normal stacking rolls, dummies, movement restrictions. If activated, the supply units must be the first Union units moved each turn. Since they move first, they're going to clog the roads. They cannot move into an area solely controlled by the Confederates. Once they've moved, the Union player they can then move other units eligible to move. All other units can move into, through, or out of an area containing supply trains that move, but they can't do it using the road. Remember, you can cross terrain without roads. It's really a forced march thing that makes you want the roads. Supply trains in combat. Supply trains are destroyed if alone in an area with Confederate cavalry infantry. That's real. They must occupy the reserve position here. And they're worth 5 victory points each if the Confederates destroy them. So there's very little reason for the Union not to move base, you would think, because you get 10, assuming the Confederates let them, you get 10 victory points for doing so. And even if you lose both your supply trains, you just lose those 10 victory points. There's 2 special garrison units, the Richmond Garrison Infantry and the Reserve Artillery, which are, of course, in Richmond right now. And they have special rules. The Richmond Garrison Infantry may never leave the areas comprising the Richmond Fortified Zone under any circumstance. The Garrison Infantry may freely move about the fortified zone. The Reserve Artillery is also the same rules, but we had to make that a sub-condition of that rule. Stuart's Cav. The Confederate had Stuart. This was his famous ride around the enemy army. To reflect this, the Cav units probe and block probes with a +1 die roll modifier when rolling on the probe chart. When they're being probed, they give a -1 modifier. But you have to reveal a Cav for each -1 you claim. These 2 Cav units are halved in combat strength against enemy units as normal, but they can claim a column shift to the right on the fire combat results table for each of these 2 units present in the line position, which can be pretty big. These 2 units have their combat factors circled on the counter. It's kind of white. You'll see it here. I could hunt them down, but you'll see. Okay. There are entrenchments in the game. These guys. Units are set up with an entrenchment counter in their area. They cannot construct entrenchments during the course of the game, and if the unit voluntarily or is forced to leave an entrenched area, the marker is lost permanently. If you're in a line position in an entrenched area, you take 1 less strength point loss per round for a line position if the loss is called for on either the CIC or FCRT. Due to the smaller time scale in this game, there's only 1 combat round per turn. This rule, along with restrictions when moving, means that artillery in swamps are basically completely ineffectual on attack. How do you win? The Confederates get these during their victory point phase at the end of the scenario. No, for each turn of the scenario. 1 victory point for each strength point that they cause to the Union. 2 victory points per turn that McClellan can't link up. And then at the end of the scenario, they get 1 for each straggler lost, not recovered. 3, essentially the same as the real losses. 3 victory points for each ineffective infantry division. 5 if there's no effective infantry that's north of the Chickahominy at the end of the game. Now that's actually what McClellan's trying to do. So you can see that 10 points now comes with a 5-point penalty on it. And 3 victory points for each Union gunboat sunk. The Union gets 1 for each strength point that they kill, 1 per gunboat adjacent to Area 77 per turn, 1 each time Lee can't trace back to Richmond, and then at the end of the game, 1 for each Confederate straggler, 2 for each ineffective Confederate infantry division, a little less than what the Union loses, and 10 if the Union shifts his base. An automatic end of game and decisive Union victory occurs if the Union captures Richmond and destroys the Confederate capital. The game immediately ends and the Union player gets an automatic victory. There's a few scenarios. There's a Savage Station and a Malvern Hill scenario. These are getting increasing complexity, and then there's the whole campaign. The special rules on the campaign, there's some reinforcements rules for the Confederates, which is basically those new commands. Hill and Whiting into Jackson, and then the creation of Longstreet. And then the other is for the Union, their only special rule is their at start units that are north of the Chickahominy may not move until game turn 3 unless they're attacked. And that's about it. Okay, optional rules. Let me swap batteries because I am using some of these. The first one is no Stuart raid. Well, that would get rid of the special abilities for the Stuart Cav. I don't want to do that. The advantages that they have are well earned and are historical. Corduroy bridges. Both sides had a number of corduroy bridges that they built the Union more. Both sides have 4 counters for them. They can be built by infantry or cav before the movement phase begins. Before the movement phase begins, the Union player designates the unit building it. You place a bridge construction counter on the river. And then at the beginning of the next friendly movement phase, that counter flips over and now you have a bridge. If there are any enemy units in the area that you wish to cross the bridge into, you'll have to attack them. But you can build the bridge to launch your attack, which is kind of weird. Except there can be no enemy units in the area occupied by the unit that's designated to build the bridge. You can't build them on a turn following a rain turn, and they're destroyed immediately at the beginning of a turn following a rain turn. You can't pick them up and carry them around. I believe destroyed probably means you have 4 for the game, and you won't have 4 on the map at all time, basically. You might, but when they're destroyed, they're gone for good. The Union also has 2 pontoon bridges and an engineer counter. and this is an optional counter. It has a little star on it. The engineer's sole purpose is to build pontoon bridges. The engineer can build 2 per game. The Union engineer can move into an area adjacent to a river, place a pontoon bridge in the same movement phase, and friendly units can cross it in that same turn. They're fast, and I've seen the Union Reenactor Engineer Company were able to beat. I knew a guy who was on it. They were able to beat the current U.S. Army with like bridging tools. So. Obviously, though, they couldn't ride a tank over their pontoon bridge, but whatever. Well, that's their claim. Pontoon bridges are destroyed immediately at the beginning of a turn following a rain turn, and they may not be picked up and moved along. So that's a little faster way that the Union can bridge a river. The engineer begins this scenario with McClellan. It can move 1 area per turn, but may not force march. It has no strength point value. In combat, it must be in the reserve position, and it will be eliminated if alone. So I will find little Mac and put that there. And remember, I haven't flipped the counters over yet. Destroying bridges. All bridges, including the ones on the map, except for railway bridges over major rivers, can be temporarily impassable due to flooding. All bridges can be eliminated by destruction. Any bridge can be destroyed simply by leaving an infantry or cav unit adjacent to it and declaring it destroyed. It takes place at the end of the phasing player's movement phase only. There's a bridge destroyed marker. They can be rebuilt, but only with corridor or pontoon bridges. And you can't do that either if you have enemy units in the same space as you. And that's it. And we're not starting tonight, but we might get some in tomorrow. I don't know. I'm having a hard time activating. You need to puzzle over a certain fundamental, how do I start this thing? Because honestly, this is a tricky situation. The Confederates have a fundamental desire to kind of attack the Union now, but there are a number of iffy conditions. First of all, their unentrenched stuff is up here. If this stuff gets attacked, that triggers the possibility of the base change, which is 10 extra victory points. Might it be better to wait several turns? And, I mean, it's not like the Union Army is getting bigger or anything, but, might it be better to wait several turns and not trigger that loss? Well, there's a danger because then there's the gunboats. Gunboats are kind of the timer, I think, on the Confederates in this game. Anyway, as I'm trying to think about this kind of stuff and figure out how the hell am I going to proceed with this? And I'm not doing it standing up here looking at the board. I'm too fucking lazy for that. I'm doing it in my avoidance mode of, spamming and watching the news and playing video games and stuff instead of doing this, but every now and then thinking about it and saying, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I'm just going to dive in and try. That's the only way that works it. I did want to give a quick update. So when I contacted Compass about the die in prelude to Rebellion being screwed up, and their customer service is very good. It's a one-man operation, I think, but and not just now, but in general. But yeah, they immediately sent one out. Unfortunately, they sent it out in a manila envelope with, I think, no protection, and there's a little die-sized hole in it. So I had to contact them again, and I feel so terrible about this because I've had so many issues with deliveries from Compass for some reason that are absolutely, well, this one's more their fault than others, but that are really kind of not their base fault. Like one where the box got crushed, here where this got ripped. They have a do not bend, but the post office can't respect that. They really just can't. Anyway, I'm assuming it'll get resolved because, again, they are very good about that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm like, yeah, my manila envelope came with a die-sized hole in it. Great. This is tricky for the Confederates. This is the launching point. There's, one, and again, these are going to be flipped over so that I've got hidden counters, but I want to observe this situation as it's known to be at the start of the game. Both players are in that situation. Crossing the river is painful, but crossing it against one unit may not be that painful. Additionally, though, I have the opportunity to bring Jackson downward and begin the attack on Mechanicsville using him. Of course, then I have the penalty of multiple commands hitting at once. The way this terrain is structured here, this entrenched position is protecting from these guys getting over at all easily. So I could come up here and then maybe force march, or just come up here and present a threat, or just cross immediately and launch an attack, or wait for Jackson to do the attack. And that's a lot of different options, none of which is absolutely clear, you know, is the best choice, right? Let me look. So I've got Magruder here. I've got a leader. The Union does not have a leader. They don't have any intrinsic leaders like the Confederates did back in Mississippi Fortress. I can kind of wedge myself in here. I only have to fight one bad round of combat. And I think that's the idea. I think that's what I want to do. Because once I turn the flank here, so the danger is that I leave too weak a force here at, what is this, Meadowbrook, by trying to do an outflank, or trying to, you know, outflank their line. But the frontal assault across the river would work. Now, the question is, what is the weather? And there is none normally on this turn. The rain comes over back here. We might get a weather event, though, because I'm going to play with the optional weather. That's going to shake things up a little bit, make it a little less than just, you know, hey, let's play the historical scenario straight down the line. But I think that's where my plan is. I think I'm going to try to force Mechanicsburg, and then, or Mechanicsville, and then, you know, now I have turned their flank. The danger with that, the river crossings are especially painful here because they're swamp river. And then there's swamp stream here. So I've got problems cutting through, but the entrenchment reduces the damage on each attack. So that's particularly painful. Let me make sure, I understand the terrain situation there. So the river swamp, combat halved, an odds column shift against, and artillery can't play. But I'm not reducing the losses, and that's huge. So I think I do want to threaten his position here, force him to move. Maybe I can capture one or both of the supply trains and neutralize that 10-point victory. But I certainly can't just sit here. Why? Well, because the gunboats will eventually come up and start generating victory points. What is the victory for the game? Well, that's a good question. I'm assuming, you know, it's 0. It is, yeah, so this is victory points at the end of the game. Unfortunately, no victory conditions listed here for the Lee Takes Command campaign series, but I think the general is most victory points at the end of the game, and if it's equal, it's a Confederate victory. Well, eventually these guys will generate victory points. I can't give the Union too much time. On the other hand, though, I could prevent them from that 10-point bonus by just delaying. They're not allowed to entrench down here. Entrenchments, out of all things, are fixed at the beginning of the game, I believe. Although oddly there are more, as though there's another scenario. Yeah, they cannot construct them during the course of the game. Again, it's kind of appealing to not launch that attack, to not try to weaken the Union position and shake it up. So I don't know. Are there any other victory conditions that are in play here? I don't know. Sole possession of 77, that's Richmond, right? Yep.
Conceivably, cutting this line could cause victory points from the McClellan unable to trace. I get 5 of those 10 points back at the end of the game if I can clear the Union from above the Chickahominy. Yeah, I think it's worth following the historical path. I'll try to get the first turn in on this video. Mainly, though, this is almost an intro to this, so maybe I shouldn't even start playing. I should just load this up. Yeah, let's do that. Kick the can down the road a little further.